Ramachandran is one of India's most distinguished and prolific artists who has ceaselessly experimented with visual language for more than 5 decades. Born in 1935, Ramachandran received a master's degree in Malayalam Literature from Kerala University in 1957. He joined the Kala Bhavana at Viswa Bharati University, Santiniketan, West Bengal, to study art under masters like Ramkinkar Baij and Benodebehari Mukherjee. He joined Jamia Millia University at New Delhi as a lecturer in art education in 1965. He continued to work here for next 28 years as a professor and head developing the department. His art is uniquely both contemporary and Indian in essence. Painter, sculptor, graphic, artist designer, and art educationist, Ramchandran has explored diverse mediums and scales with a dynamic personal vision and distinctive artistic style. In 2003, the National Gallery of Modern Art, New Delhi, organized a major retrospective of his works. The artist has written and illustrated nearly 50 children's picture books that have been published in India, Japan, England, and the USA. He has executed several large-scale murals, including those for Gandhi Darshan in 1969 and the Maurya Sheraton Hotel in 1976. In 2003, he completed the monumental granite bas-relief sculpture, 125 feet long and 19.5 feet high, at Rajiv Gandhi Memorial at Sriperumbudur near Chennai, Tamilnadu in 2003. In 2006, his 40 years of research on Kerala temple murals culminated into a voluminous book, and in 2005, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. And it is a privilege to have Ramchandran, Achyutji Ramchandran, as a lot of people don't know his first A, and sometimes they refer to him by that. But before opening it, I want to also introduce the distinguished person who's actually done the entire dialogue with A. Ramchandran, Professor R. Siva Kumar. Professor R. Siva Kumar is an Indian contemporary art historian, art critic, and curator. His major research has been in the area of early Indian modernism, with a special focus on the Santiniketan school, where he's been teaching for many years. He has written several important books, lectured widely on modern Indian art, and contributed articles to prestigious international projects. He has also curated major exhibitions on Santiniketan, retrospectives of important Indian artists such as Rabindranath Tagore, Benodebehari Mukherjee, which was co-curated with Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh and K.G. Subramaniam, among others. He's also written this beautiful voluminous 2-volume publication on A. Ramchandran. And with that, I would like to have you people at least say hello, and before we start the recorded thing. On to you, Ramchandran and Mr. Siva Kumar.
It's a great pleasure to have this conversation with Ramchandran, and I mean, we haven't met each other like most of you, but we have been talking to each other during the last 1 year quite often. So we have been in conversation, and this conversation probably started many years ago when I was a student and when he visited. And I had known of him much earlier when I was in Trivandrum and before I came to Santiniketan. But when I came to Santiniketan, I had this opportunity to meet him because he was a frequent visitor. And so this is a conversation that began some many years back, and it's a conversation that is going. And so we are going to have this segment of that conversation today. So thank you, Siddharth and the JD Center of Art for inviting me to have this conversation with Ramachandran. The time we have today is very short to talk about a career that is as long and varied as Ramachandran's. So without much ado, let me begin the conversation straight away. It is always a pleasure talking to you, Ramda.
Thank you.
You are an artist who is as thoughtful as you are intuitive, and you have a perspective on your practice. Looking back to someone like me, it is clear that your early life in Kerala has left its mark on your mind in several ways. The love for nature that is central to your more recent work, and the kind of encounter that you had with the progressive writers in those early days, and the role that these writers played in the transformation of the society gave you a certain perspective at that point of time. But you also followed what was happening in the art world through journals, and I think more importantly, through your visits to Chitralayam, which I think was a very, very interesting collection of early modern art. And I was wondering if this, visit to Chitralayam, these visits to Chitralayam you had, played a role in shaping your understanding and approach to art, at least at that point of time.
Well, at the early period of my childhood, there was hardly any kind of art activity in Kerala to talk about, except the great remembrance of Ravi Verma, and his tradition was the only point of discussion for people to talk about art. Beyond that, there wasn't anything much, except for some of the periodicals like Madhurabhumi used to bring out some stray articles on Bengal school and the people who followed Bengal school style like Madhav Menon and all this. But my main learning of art starts from the visit to Chitralayam. Chitralayam was an art gallery which was established by the last Maharaja's time. And because of C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who was the Diwan, who was a member of the Theosophical Society, he had a wider contact with many people and intellectuals who belonged to the Theosophical Society, including Rorik and Rukmini Arundale and all these people. And Dr. Cousins was one of the members of the Theosophical Society, and he was invited by C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer to come and establish an art museum for the state, which is a very, very progressive step at that time taken by the government. And then, fortunately, Dr. Cousins was given the full freedom to make selections of the artists he wanted, and also along with the set of paintings bought from Raja Ravi Verma by the state, were to be organized within that museum. Rorik being one of the main important person from the Theosophical Society, he was given a separate museum at the entrance of the zoo, just side of the zoo. The Chitralayam, I started visiting maybe when I was 8 or 9 years old. That time, I used to run around with somebody who came with me, either some of my relatives or somebody. But around 11 or 12, I decided to go myself. And then, because I was too small and I don't have not to take a ticket or something like that. And then I was too small, so the attendants will not put on the light for me. So I used to walk through the dark corridors of Chitralayam, looking at the paintings very carefully. I can still remember, my memory is so vivid. When I entered, on the right and the left side, the first painting was the visit by Gaganendranath Tagore. A woman with a light, looking down to the steps, and a man coming up to the house. So, that is the first painting I had. Then, of course, there was Nandalal Bose, a woman on a boat, with her hair flowing, which actually what he did is he put the paper wet and put a blotch of ink, and then it spread the whole paper like her hair, almost suggesting the waves as well as the movement of the air. So then, there was some of the remarkable paintings were by D.P. Rai Chaudhary. The Evening of Life, there was a Jew, walking in the... in those days, I was a great admirer of that painting. I remember I wrote an essay on that.
Okay.
To the extent, I even described that yellow D.P. Rai Chaudhary used to suggest the twilight of life, like something like that.
Yeah.
So even at that time, I was quite fascinated by that. Then there was this, I forgot his name, who did this Agni Swaha and some other painting, which is no longer talked about artist. I forgot his name now. Then there was a small room.
Pramod Chatterjee.
Pramod Kumar Chatterjee.
Yeah.
Then there was a small room with beautiful Madhavanans. A complete set of his bamboo grove, is the spirit of lotus. Then there was this squirrel, and then there was the bamboo. Bamboo grove is a brilliant work. And so all those works are still etched in my mind. And surprisingly, I never went to Riverma section that much, nor it fascinated me. It's surprising. Maybe I am a product of, the post Riverma. So maybe my mind has been tuned to a different level already. Maybe it's a process of time, I suppose. The new generation will be tuned to something else. Same way there was a tuning up in my mind. So I was more attracted to the Bengal school. And that is why and then besides in my house, there were bound volumes of Modern Review. And Modern Review used to have writings of Tagore and, some of his poems and all this. And there were one color reproduction, every volume. And I saw most of the Bengal school artists, original works, starting from Abhinandan's Mother India to many of the works of other artists. So in a sense, even though no member in my family was interested in art, if I tell you frankly, and which my family won't accept, but in some way or other, I was so different from all of them that my enthusiasm for art did not diminish in that negative space at all. I pushed myself.
Yeah. So that's true, because after you're doing your master's in Malayalam literature, you decide to come to Santiniketan in, I think, 1957. And but by then, when you arrived, Rabindranath had died some 15 years before. Nandalal was already retired for, I think, 6 years. Benodebehari and Ramkinkar were still around. And in some ways, in spite of both of them being there, Santiniketan was a depleted place in some sense. And some would say that the best phase was over. But I mean, I would like to know what drew you, if there was something that drew you to Santiniketan, and what were your impressions of those years in Santiniketan?
Well, I did not know about Santiniketan that much as you know now. Because at that time, my interest in art was more centered around the Madras artists whose work used to appear in the journals and magazines. And of course, stray articles of Sousa in Illustrated Weekly and all those things. Then as a college student, I used to read whatever article on art in any paper I come across. So I was not that familiar with Bengal school. Santiniketan as an institution at the time when I'm talking about. Before coming to Santiniketan and becoming an artist, I was an active member of the cultural society in Trivandrum, and a literary and cultural society. Most of the writers of that time, they were some of them my professors, and some of them my friends. And we were regular in participating most of the cultural functions in Trivandrum. So, we had a Tagore Day celebrated every year. So we call it Kavyolsa. So at that time, I was asked to sing some songs. I was a musician at that time, not a painter. And I was asked to sing some Tagore songs. And so there was one Mrs. Vijaya Rakhan, was the professor of music in Women's College. She was organizing the program because she knew Tagore music well. Yeah. She was a student of Santiniketan in Kala Bhavana, and she was a very favorite student of Nandalal. So whenever I went to her house for, rehearsals, she used to talk much about Santiniketan. And it was quite exciting to listen to her, about Master Mashai, Nandalal Bose, about other artists, and about Kingarda. But the best thing happened is she said, you go through the album, this is from Santiniketan. I saw this photograph of Sandal family. And, literally even today when I speak about it, that one look at that work had changed my whole career, totally. My whole, attitude towards art, towards, my being an artist, everything changed. Because even though I saw the works of Panikkar and all other artists' work, this was one work told me immediately that a work of art is something far beyond simple stylizations. It has to have some other spirit within it, a spirit which cannot be defined. It is not confined to the styles, it is not confined to the technique, it is not confined to anything except that human spirit which comes through it. And that is what Ramkinkar is. Ramkinkar's work is only that expression of that human spirit, which comes through so powerfully, whatever he does. And his Sandal family, when he was done, he was very young and he was actually completely flowering into a great, genius. So that is one of the finest work Indian art produced in modern times. So even now, when I think of it, that one work has paved way for me to come into this level. So even though I had a correspondence with K.C.S. Panikkar, and I was thinking of going to Panikkar after completing my MA and study painting, after looking at this painting, I said, I must go to Santiniketan. I must study under Ramkinkar. So Mrs. Vijaya Rakhan was very kind. She said, yes, you should go. That is the place for you. Because all your talents, you can sing, you can act, everything has a place in that institution. That is how, even though I got admission in Madras, I changed my course. I went to Madras, met Panikkar, and apologized to him. And I said, I'm going to Santiniketan to study. That is the complete turning point in my life.
Yeah. And when you came here, of course, you became very popular because you could sing, and you became partly part of the Sangeet Bhavana as well, because you sang for them. And I think you also broadened your interest in music, because you were doing Carnatic music before that. You came here and you learned a lot of those popular traditions, the folk traditions of this region. So it enriched you, I think, in more than one way, besides learning art from Benodebehari and Ramkinkar, who were the main teachers at that time.
Music, maybe Ramkinkar is responsible first. Kingarda did not accept me as a good student in the beginning. Okay. Because I told you, I have written somewhere. When I went the first night itself, I wanted to go and meet him. So, one of the student, Thomas, who was a ex-student of Kala Bhavana, he took me to Kingarda in the evening. Kingarda at around 8:39, he sits on a muda in the veranda of this residence, which was very close to Kala Bhavana. So he took me there. So I proudly carried all these sketches and drawings I did and tried to show off a little that I'm not an ordinary student. Maybe I had that ego at that time. So, he flipped through the drawing and, he just threw like that. He threw from the veranda, my drawings went flying into the ground, outside the house. So I was so shocked, I almost felt like, tears ran down. He said, no, I accept Solvenai. So because I can understand, because they were all pale imitations of little Panikar stylization, little, modernism, little Picasso, little everybody. Wanted to become modernist. I was trying to, copy some of the famous artist styles and stylizations. It was not a genuine expression in that sense. So what he did is correct. He threw out all those things. सब कुछ नूतन करता you have to start from the beginning. That is what he said. Even though I was very shocked and upset, I came back to my room and I cried because I came all the way for a man. I thought he will be very happy to accept me because I'm a qualified person. I'm not like an ordinary student. I'm not only just a school pass. I have such a, what do you call it, so much of knowledge about art than many other ordinary students. But nothing. I found I am even worse than those people. So then, I started thinking about it. Then I thought, okay, let me take up the challenge. I'll see whether I worked, I went on. He said, Tumige sketch karo. He said, sketch karo. So I used to go out and sketch. That became my habit. Nobody taught me at that time. I just carried some papers and started going to Sandal villages. But here another person comes, Kiran Sinha. I met another artist who was settled there. And he was working independently. Was Kiran Sinha. Kiran Sinha also is a student of Kala Bhavana. He studied under Nandalal Bose, but he gave up and he became a rebel. And he started doing this pointillistic kind of expressionism, which since he is married to a German woman, there was much more of that impact from her also in his work. But one thing which he helped me is to take me with, he said, come with me, I will introduce you to Sandal villages. So he took me there, and he had one servant who used to work with him. So I used to usually go to her village, Kakku. So in that village near Bhavandanga, so I was a regular person. I used to sit and sketch. Initially, it was very tough. When like Garda said, go out and sketch. But to a moving object, you cannot tell anybody you sit there for 10 minutes. Nobody has time. They are doing some work. So, you go on watching, and then whenever you get some chance of, observing some of the characteristics of their movement or body structure, I started drawing. That was the greatest learning, which is useful even today. Wherever you go, if it is a leaf, if it's a human body, if it's a tree, if it's a wave, it's a piece of cloud, everything has its own structural qualities. It is that perception which makes the nature worth looking at again and again and again. For thousands of years, mankind looked at the nature and discovered new ways of doing it. That is how art is living. Art is living not because of ideas, not because of theories. Art is living simply because of man's perception of nature again and again. And that fresh perception gives you another turn to the art movement. That is the case of entire art history I understand today. So I think, that kind of opening up, it was like I was told Ramachandran used to teach very philosophical things by saying one sentence or two sentences. To me, Ramkinkar was like Ramachandran. He said one or two sentences that made me understand things are very different in art, not what I thought. I thought, I can be a Susa, or I can be a Rasa, or I can become someone else who was famous in those days. But then I forgot all of them.
Yeah.
I have completely cut off from all these ideas of modern art, and I became absolutely concentrating on what Kingarada taught me, and whatever he said, I used to follow. Of course, I wanted to impress him. Again, my stupidity, that, when in the terracotta class, everybody was doing a small terracotta. I tried to do a very large terracotta 4 feet high. So that was a big size, of course. So you build up with the tape, like system. You make coil and build it. So I must have for 2 weeks to build up a mother and child composition. And then Kingarada never looked at me. He will walk through all the students, looked at even the stupid girls who are doing some work, but he will not look at my work. And that made me more furious, because the man for whom I came, he won't allow me to give me a lift even. So anyway, I thought I will impress him by this sculpture. So it's almost finished. He came, and then he stood. He was passing by. He stood on my side. And then there was a wooden log lying there. He lifted it and gave one blow. He bet that, lump of clay, it fell all over the class. And he said, Uta, make clay again and do it again. And he walked away. It was a very cruel thing to do for a teacher. Today, I am a teacher, I will never do this to a student. So, but I didn't lose my hope. I again picked up all the clay. I went on sitting, preparing clay again, and I started working. From that day onwards, Kingarada was a different man to me. Then he was very nice. He used to call me every evening to his house to talk. We had long discussions, fights, everything. And he treated me very different. That is my greatest achievement. That is simply because I wanted him to give me everything what he gave to me.
So I think in 1964, you then moved to Delhi.
Yeah.
And this was a big change, because both Kerala and Santiniketan were sort of semi-rural places. And so now you went into a big city, and your art also took a very different turn at this point. Then in Delhi for almost 20 years, you began to do these mural-sized paintings. And this was a very important period for you as an artist, and also an important period in your life. And you were extremely productive during those 20 years. I mean, you have always been productive. Yeah. But there is a, and when you look at that period, and there's a lot of important works, starting with your 1965, it was called Indian Resurrection. And then you have other important works. In 70, you have The Ceiling. Next year, I think you did The Anatomy Lesson, The Audience. And 72, you did your iconic Kali Puja. Next year, the very large, The End of the Yadavas. And then it culminated in the early 80s with the puppet series paintings and your work based on Sadat Hasan Manzoor. So if you go through these work, there's a whole range of emotions and ranging from pain, from to anger, to banter, political satire and sarcasm. I mean, kind of thing. I mean, maybe in that order. And uh, given the time we have, I mean, I don't think so we can talk about all of these paintings and the issues in detail. But there is one which, to me, stood out when I first encountered some of these works. And that was the painting you did in '67 called Encounter. Uh, this very large, I think it was what, uh, extremely large. Yeah, yeah, it's a large, very large painting. I remember that. And it was also, I think, a very seminal painting in defining your approach at that particular point of time. Because in it, when I look at it, I find there a combination of your early love for Dostoevsky, the kind of the uh, let's say what comes through in Dostoevsky's writing, the anguished, passionate cry of someone who is, breaking into a new world, and also your interest in non-mainstream modernism, especially the Mexican muralists like Orozco, Secures, and so on. We see these things coming together in some painting. But when I first saw it, I saw it in a reproduction when I was a student. And it struck me there was also something else. Like one of those figures towards the end of the painting, the multi-arm figure, sort of reminded me of the dancing Shiva of Etumanur. And also, I think there's an Agora figure in the same temple. I mean, that also came to my mind. I mean, I don't think anybody has talked about your interest in Kerala murals at that time, but I thought it was just there somewhere in the background. Now, do you think now in retrospect that these things were at least subterraneously present in your mind even then? Because you were also researching on Kerala mural at that time.
True, so, that this particular period is an enigma for me, even for me. Because there are pure logic, because today people say, oh, that period was very good, you are very powerful, this thing and that thing. But the point is, at that time, I was coming as a young man, financially in a very poor state and without much recognition and totally unknown in art scene in Delhi. Because of an offer from a gallery, I took this, it was an adventurous step forward to move from Santiniketan to straight to Delhi. Now, these are two different worlds altogether. But when I came from Santiniketan, even in my last years in Santiniketan, when I was doing the research, I was already painting the early version of Kala Bhavana like that. But for the reason is very simple. Every artist is conditioned by the mental state when he is doing that work. And I think, one should be true to that, whatever it is, whether it is good or bad or whatever it is, you should be faithful to whatever state of mind you have. And it was a very difficult state. I had, suffered, lack of money, lack of respect, lack of support from people, and then wandering around in Calcutta looking for a job, doing a theater in November theater and getting 30, 40 rupees, living on a, roll bought from the Karim's shop and living the whole day on that. Sometimes without money, walking from South Calcutta to North Calcutta. So that was a different life. I cannot recreate anymore. That was a life where I saw a very hard facts of life, every day. People are, like Calcutta is one of the most complex cities ever you can go and all people, from the rich to poorest, exist simultaneously. There is no clean file kind of system like Delhi. Rich is separate and poor is separate. There everybody is mixed up. So in that mixed up, you encounter things which are very depressing. I have written about it, about Calcutta, my experience in one of my articles. So those days, and plus my great obsession with Dostoevsky, and reading again and again, like Bhagavad Gita. So, that obsession of reading Dostoevsky plus seeing this kind of, depressing scenes, like, father and mother sitting with a dead child and people are buying oranges next to it. Or a man who is looking like a Christ lying in the gutter and drinking that dirty water. So my Christ images come from there. Or most of the paintings which I did later, most of the paintings I did in that period was the accumulation of all these images. So I played with that images. It went, some I stretched, so it stretched along. Some I pressed down and it bloated up. Things like that. So these are images of that period which I played with and created. And removing the head, I made it totally anonymous, kind of bodies floating around. That was very true for that period. Today, I can't do it, nor I should do it. So later, what happened to my mind? People think that one should stay what you did in the early career of your life till end of the thing. Most of my contemporary artists believe that I was stupid to give up that kind of work and do something else. Because they don't understand, you can write a love letter when you are 18 years old. You can't write a love letter when you are 80 years old. That looks more ridiculous than, following the trends kind of thing. This is not, life is not meant for trends and, decisions by the art world. Life is determined by your own philosophy and your outlook and your own experience. So I stood on my ground. This is a gradual change coming within me. I came back, I settled in Delhi. The early period I recollected and worked on the materials I brought from Calcutta. But later, when I looked at Delhi as a city, it was too uninspiring for me. There wasn't anything for me to look at. The middle class people running around or the upper class people celebrating life doesn't interest me. So, when I came as an artist, I was forced to go to these social gatherings and parties. I found it is so artificial and so life, for me, I lived always like an outsider standing there. I was as good as the person who is serving the food. So, gradually I lost interest in that social life of Delhi very much. Number one. Number two, I thought I must look for a place to work. Initially, I was happy because Jamia at that time was a remote, it's a kind of a village outside Delhi. So the atmosphere and plus my head of the department gave me a beautiful studio, beautiful for me at that time. Such a large space to work. That was inspiring. Second thing, if you walk around Jamia, near the Jamuna, that was a very rural landscape. You see the working class people going and working in the fields or things like that. So that was more attractive. But the problem is of sketching. Sketching is in Santiniketan, sketching people is easy because they understand that. But in here, there is no culture of people sketching them. So unless, I have a student or somebody with me who will protect me if there is any problem, then otherwise I could not have done it easily, the sketching which I want. But even then, my early works, some of the, like the Naika series and things like that, some of the works I did, they are actually from around Jamia and the monkey trainers, the Baluwala, that
Yeah.
the gypsies going around. And then in the last effort, when I came here in this house, nearby I saw this Gaudiya Lahars, and they fascinated me so much. Even though they are very hostile kind of people, but their image, as a form, as their dress, their livelihood, everything to me was a symbol of tremendous strength, which ordinary people cannot imagine, the quality of their body, quality of their dress. So even though they are hostile to me, if I cannot sketch. So I used to go with Chameli and stand there and watch. So sometimes they used to ask, "Kya dekh rahe ho?" So you can't say. You can't say this. Then we used to walk away. So, but I went on working, came back. I worked and reworked the sketches. So from the bodies, the floating bodies, and early experiments with quasi-political, quasi-expressionistic kind of work, then it started gradually moving to a point.
Yeah.
Then something very tragic happened is with my eyesight. So in an operation, I lost this eye because when a lack of anesthesia, I jerked and the lens was damaged. So another lens was just on the top. So this eye is always a problem. Even now it is a problem. So that was also a very horrifying experience for an artist.
Yes.
In those days, losing your eye, what will you do? To me, to be a painter is the only thing I can think of in my life. I have to work, I have to do something, otherwise it's not worth living it. Because I cannot think of any other thing I can do. I did a teaching job, but I was still a painter, I was still a sculptor. I didn't damage my professional area. So all this culminated into that Yadi.
Yeah.
So Yadi was so many trends coming up. One is I started looking at the modern art, what is happening in,
Can we just take a digression before we come to Yadi?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's wonderful, this journey you had from this early work to Yadi. And I would like you to talk about Yadi a little bit. But before that, I thought I would like to touch on a different aspect of your work, which has not received the attention it actually requires. This is your work as a designer and especially as a creator of books for children. And this, if I remember, it started around 1972 or about that time. And it continued parallel to your painting, which was so different, which you just explained, until about the early 80s. And during this 10 years or so, you made so many interesting books for children. And not many Indian artists have worked for children in the way you have done. And in these books, you have chosen not to work in your usual personal style, but you have employed various styles adopted from the folk arts of India. And can you tell us a little about how you came to do them, how this interest came about, and why you chose to do them the way you did?
Yeah. Actually, the children's book, I did some of the children's book when I was a student in Kala Bhavana. But that is in Kerala. So in the vacation when I went, the well-known writer C.N. Sriyandan Nair, he was a great friend of mine. He said the National Bookstore, that is the Writers Cooperative Society, run by the writers, they were publishing a book of 10 books, a box for children on Nehru's birthday. So they asked me, why don't you come and do it? I didn't think about it, but there was some money involved in it and I needed money very badly. So I went there and stayed in Kotta and did these 10 books. With of course, Aravindan was not a famous filmmaker. So he used to come and sit with me and help me also. So it was a nice, friendship and nice people, like Arur and Tagari and many of the writers, meeting them. And it was a very interesting atmosphere. I could do my first children's book. And I did the way I liked, like at that time I didn't think much. But only one thing which was in my mind is Nandalal Bose, the Sahaj Party did for small children in this school. So you know why I thought of it? Because we didn't have those color printing in those days. So we had the choices black and white, basically, and 1 or 2 flat colors. What I did after looking at Master Shah's work, I thought maybe I can use like woodblock prints, like 1 or 2 colors, and evenly distributed, graphically distributed. You can make a very beautiful book. Even with 4 colors, sometimes you cannot get that kind of quality. So it is actually a Master Shah Nandalal Bose who inspired me to do children's book at that point of time, because he gave only the clue. But at that time, I was not thinking very seriously about children's book till I got my own children. So when I got my own children, we were a very compact family. Myself, my wife and 2 children. We were too attached to it. And it was a small, like a small nest with 2 birds and 2, small children. So, it was we all born and brought up in joint family. We had a different experience. But when in a nuclear family, you face a different situation. What to tell children, where my grandmother used to tell stories, or, there were festivals and temple, you can go. There are so many things. You can go to the river, catch fish, things. There was a tremendous exposure to nature when we were children. That is missing now, because, all my sensibilities are built up because of my childhood exposure to nature. Whether catching a frog or a dragonfly, to swimming in the river, or playing with the sand and making images at the riverbed. All these contributed to my childhood. I felt sorry for my children because in Jamia, even though we had a fairly large house, except their friends, when summer holidays, they used to go to Lucknow. So we are only left with 2 children, and we had not much money to go to anywhere, any other place. Besides, summer was the only time I could make my paintings without any, disturbances. So I concentrated on my work during the daytime. Evening when I come back, I used to sit and play with my children. And sometimes I make a drama and myself a character and my children are a character. And then we play that role like a drama. And then, I thought it's a very nice way of engaging them. Then, they will say, you tell a story. So many of the stories when I told, they used to respond so warmly. And some of the stories they used to reject outright. So they became my editors. Okay. So then I said, why not I do children's book? Why not I make some children's book? That is how it started. Then this Arun Puri of Thompson Press, he used to come to our house as a friend. He said, why don't you do some children's book? So I did first 6 books. And they were published, but in those days, children's book was not a very profitable or popular thing. So it had a natural death also. Then, fortunately, some UNESCO team of experts who came from different parts of Asia, they saw my work with Arunpuri, some of the originals. And one of the editors, Tadashi Matsui, of Fukuoka Shoten publishers in Japan, he saw the book. He met me only very shortly, but when he came back, he wrote a letter and saying, I'm sending you a ticket. You come over, stay with us for 1 month and do 2 books for us. It was a great thing for those days to get an offer like that. Then that point, my attitude changed, because then I knew I'm entering a very professional area of children's book illustration. Throughout the world, there are great illustrators. Maurice Sandak and all these people, they are throughout known the world just as artists. And some of them are extremely brilliant. And fortunately, he sent me some of those books published by different countries. And when I looked at it, then it struck to me, all these children's books, they are doing it within their own cultural context. When Indians make children's book, they make like Jack and Jill went up the hill kind of illustrations. They don't have any original idea. Only instead of Jack, you call it Ram and Sita went to a hill to fetch a pail of water kind of thing. So it's only the changing of names. But then, the thought came to me, why not we have a style of our own? India has a very great visual tradition, especially the folk tradition. Thanks to Bhaskar Kulkarni, was a friend of mine and an expert who did a lot of research about folk traditions in India. He traveled to Madhubani, he traveled to Worli, he traveled all over the India. He used to come to me, show me the things. I used to get very inspired by those words of Ganga Devi and all these people. So all these things put together, I thought maybe it's a brilliant idea to do touch folk traditions to illustrate children's, for 2 reasons. One, for children without any reference to realism, we can have conceptual art introduced to children, because they have no notion of realism. They won't ask, oh, this face doesn't look like somebody. They won't say that. For them, even a symbolic thing is sufficient. So the circle is one triangle is a nose, 2 dots is eyes. Even that will be sufficient for them. So you have a complete area in India for children's book. Even today, people have not explored it. It is a magnificent field where we can develop a new kind of visual culture if we want, connecting them to the Indian traditions through folk and tribal traditions, not through classical art. So mainly because the living folk tradition is a living art. Folk tradition is also practiced by people even today. It is a art which is handed over from generation to generation. It is an art which is done at the time of celebrating their rituals and some of the significant ceremonies of their life. They have a very powerful quality of communicating. So that is how I moved to, I really wanted to do enormous experiment with children's book. I tried to do many kinds of book within a short time, because it was my life of an illustrator of children's book was a short-lived phase of my life. Of course, at that time, painting was not being sold, and we had very little money. The copyright money of the children who helped me to live more decently as possible.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, what is interesting to me when we look back at your career, I always thought maybe your work with this children's book opened up a new way, and Yayadi came next. And that was a watershed moment in your career. You were sort of turning your back on what you were doing so far, and you began to move in a completely new direction. In a way, this marks a new beginning in your career, and interests which were occasionally visible like an undercurrent, as I said earlier, in your work, and in maybe in areas like children's book. These began to kind of come to the forefront. And many of the motifs in Yayati came from Ajanta, and they are very recognizable. But there are also a lot of other references which are more subtle, which go back to the late medieval sculptural traditions. And the palette is absolutely different from what you might see in most of the mural traditions of India. Maybe a little bit into the some kind of miniatures, but even then, it's a very unusual palette that you use there, quite original. In some ways, it was an audacious act of eclecticism at that point in your career and that point in Indian art. It was not merely a rejection of your own personal work up to that point, but it was also a kind of interrogation of the kind of modernism that Indian artists of your generation were engaged in. Now, I was wondering what led you to this point, and especially, and you kind of continued with that thought and the direction you took, although the initial response to this work was not entirely positive. So there might have been something, a strong conviction that led you in this direction. Can you talk a little bit about the work, the kind of thoughts behind you? Because you also said from when we are talking about an earlier phase of work that you believed there is a kind of ethics that grows from your life experience. And an artist cannot, work outside, or you believe cannot work outside, or should not work outside the ethics that your own experience points to, in a sense.
Actually, there are so many factors went into the making Yayati. Even I was not very conscious of it at that point of time. But the most important thing is all the socially relevant and socially critical work which I did before, I felt like negating all of them. For the simple reason, I saw this on the top of this is from my studio in this flat was not made. On the top of it, I watched the riots which happened in 1964.
84.
1980.
Oh, yeah.
84 riots of the Sikh riots. No? So I was standing on the top of this terrace and I was watching. There were not many houses in this colony. I could see a mob of 12 people chasing one Sardar and killing him like a dog. And that I have never seen such a cruel act in my life. Never. Right from my childhood today, that is the first time I have seen misery in Calcutta. But this is not misery. This is absolutely inhuman act of killing another human being. Like you kill a snake or rat or I don't know. Even that is wrong. To me, this was one of the most grotesque things I've experienced in my life. I almost fainted looking at it. I couldn't believe, people can do such a thing. So this was the first time I ever heard about riots and everything. But you hearing about riots and seeing it right in front of you, such thing is something else. So maybe I'm too sensitive for that. I was completely shattered. And then I started thinking about why we paint all these things. What for? Because when you are painting all this, destructive act of human beings, we are only in a sense making it look more glamorous. Your art is such, it only even a Francis Bacon looks a beautiful painting. Ultimately, whatever you say, To me, what is the difference? Then you better paint like Van Gogh's sunflowers. They are much greater spiritual significance for humankind than Francis Bacon. So there was a moral dilemma within me, whether I should follow this kind of political messaging kind of thing. For two reasons. Number, I am not a political worker. Basically I'm a humanist. I don't have much beyond that. Any idea about, I love human beings. I love the world. I love, the entire people all over the world. To me, there is no distinction at all. So for such small things of distinction and boundaries, you are killing each other. It's too much of a thing on no human being should ever think of, if you ask me. If you are a painter, you are a painter. You don't expect Bhimsen Joshi or Bede Ghulam Ali Khan to give you a political lecture on the stage. They sit and sing. They sing well. They sing so well. You are taken to a different level of spirituality, which you cannot get in this ordinary. If you look at a great painting, that painting lifts you not because of subject matter. It is because how it is painted. That there are so many artists did so many beautiful paintings, but why Van Gogh looks so distinctly different? Because it came from his heart. He expressed something beautiful, nature. You have to look at things again and again. Those artists are telling you, look, a sunflower is not a sunflower. It is far beyond that. That form itself suggests you something much more than that.
And because this comes into your next phase of work, the post-ARD works you have done, where one can see two things happening. One, as an artist, you have been taking your interest in the art world beyond Western modernism much further. And like there are so many kind of elements, not only of the larger Indian traditions, but also of Asian art, different aspects of Asian art that you have been looking at. And in fact, sometimes beyond Asia, some of those larger, what you call primitive traditions have also come into your work. That's one side of it. The other side is what comes through is a kind of deep engagement with the rural communities around Rajasthan, where you have been traveling for quite some time, partly because of your need to sketch and draw, and also the other aspect that comes besides the people is the nature. I mean, the vast world of nature, which was not there in your early part of your life in Delhi, but that begins to come in a big way in these works. Now, one sees a lot of that sensuousness of nature in your works, especially like the lotus ponds and your landscapes, and which actually, if you watch them closely, you can see that it comes through close observation combined with a lot of very subtle artistic innovation. I mean, in the way you paint. I mean, if you go through them over last 10, 15 years, we can see that. Now, the other side is a kind of looking at the people and the way they live and the kind of thing. Now, this part has been sometimes looked at as if, you are getting into a romantic world and you're, I mean, moving away from real life, etc., etc. But when I look at them, I see something else happening. You enter this world where people and nature interact in a different way, and that comes through in a narrative manner in some of those miniature paintings. And the people in a good number of your paintings, like let us say self-portrait with the umbilical cord, or Hannah and the goats, or the song of the simple tree, the people come through as kind of serious individuals with a very strong presence of their own. I mean, maybe a little inscrutable. They're iconic and inscrutable in some sense, but they are not the exotic kind of people, I mean, which tourists look for. There is a deeper involvement in these works. And this has been a characteristic. And in fact, in some of your larger sculptures, especially when you do a number of figures together into an assemblage kind of thing, there I feel that you're also kind of articulating the thoughts behind this kind of art in some sense. I mean, so basically, this has been a personal journey, probably not fully understood or appreciated. But I think this has been very important to you. And if you could say us something about how you went about this, how, I mean, what made you go back to these places again and again for so many years?
First time when I went to Rajasthan, because I found after Gaudiya Lahore, I had no other choice to study people in Delhi. Then I went with students in an excursion to Rajasthan first time, and I was fascinated by the city and people. There was something about, especially Udaipur I'm talking about, there was something about that place which has a long tradition of art, basically. All those small states created a magnificent tradition of miniature paintings. So that visual appreciation of visual culture is a part of those people in essence, which many other parts of India don't have. So their house or their dress or their landscape or the way they work, everything is like a total, absolutely green field or a field full of the yellow flowers of mustard fields. The people standing with this brilliant colored khagras and things and reflecting in a very clear sky. That sunlight itself, you cannot get anywhere else. That sunlight gives you a perception of the nature very different from any part of India I have visited. That I am telling you, it's a very personal kind of response to a place. It started developing little by little. And the more I worked, I found it is much more greater intensity. You can get so many subtleties of things which you never thought about. So, you look at a hill and you sit there and look at that hill carefully. After some time, you will see each pebble is reflecting the sunlight. So, first the total shape of the hill, and then second is like a microscopic view of the hill itself, because you can see how it is structured with the little pebbles and things like that. So in a simple shape, like a hill becomes a revelation for you. Then you look at it more carefully. Then you see some structural shape of rocks, jutting in and there. And then there are some dry grass or plants, which supplement to the total character of that. So to me, like every time I go and sit and look at it, same thing happened with the lotus pond. 40 years I sat near Eklinji lotus pond, looked at it in the morning, in the evening, at noon, even at night, 10 o'clock. So every time when I went, it is not the same lotus pond. So to me, nature has revealed in such a way. I was so surprised, my God, there is so much in nature. So much, it's an endless process by which you can create and recreate things in the nature. Instead of thinking about some theoretical point of view built up by some artist. They are maybe valid for him, but for an individual artist like me, my own search is more significant. I didn't follow my teachers. I didn't follow the Bengal school. Of course, I followed the essential philosophy of my teachers. But I didn't follow their styles. I didn't follow their concepts. I looked for my own concepts. So it is the nature who helped me to see a great possibility, not only for me, even for the future generation of artists to come. Because ultimately we are the little small things with a little spot of life within us, living in a planet which may be the only unique planet in the entire planetary system. Who knows? We have to respect that. We have to understand that even a small plant which you are cutting it out or burning it, or you are killing some insects, they are no longer will be there. These are all created in a process of evolution. We inherited this magnificent earth. And if you understand the quality of this earth, then there is no dearth for ideas for an artist. It is not necessary. You have to read philosophy. You have to study geology. You have to do politics. You have to do, you should do some economical theories. Nothing. Sometimes it is as simple as that. It is something like people like some of the people who got enlightenment in a very simple way. Like people like Ramkinkar, Paramsa, when they speak with certain simplicity. That simplicity comes not because they read all the volumes of philosophy. It is their observation of nature gives them this little sparks of fire, which can kindle some fire in someone else's mind. To me, nature will be the first and last teacher in the entire art history, whether it is prehistoric or Renaissance or Indian painting or Chinese painting. Any art historical traditions ultimately leads to only one point: response to nature.
I think nobody can disagree with that, in the sense what we are left with of nature, I mean, after all that we have done to it, I think is worth celebrating and should be celebrated. And celebrating it probably is the first step towards understanding its importance to us, and trying to kind of preserve it, and I think undo some of the things we have done. And the pandemic, which is making us do this conversation online, I think is because of what we have done to it, in a certain sense. And it has made us realize the importance of undoing some of what we have done. So maybe this is a good note to end this conversation. It is something that could go on, but I think when we are online, we have to have a time limit to things. So we'll carry on this conversation outside. But for today, let us stop here. Thank you very much for.
Thank you.
I mean, I think for an artist, like yesterday, we were having a discussion around it. And just to elaborate what he said rather jocularly to you, is because an artist, when he's doing, there is a process where he is half blind, half seeing. So there are things that he sees in front of him, and then there are things that he doesn't see, but comes into being as he paints, and then he sees it, and then he grasps it. So a painter like Ramachandran, I suppose, works like that. That it's not all pre-planned, and even any artist, I mean, even if we work, or for that matter, even writers, we have heard of writers, his favorite author Dostoevsky. The main character didn't enter his novel until he wrote about 6 or 7 drafts. And after that, the main character is discovered and enters his work. So that's part of the thing. And there are, I know, several paintings which began and in one way ended up entirely in a different place. And I suppose this happens with all creative people, unless you're one of those people who plan everything, and thinking and execution are two things. But Ramchandran certainly is an artist for whom execution and thinking are constantly interacting, and one doesn't precede the other. So I think that tells something of why he said, let the thing be over, kind of.
There's a lady, Prema Vishwanathan. You had a question for the artist?
Yeah, this is, hi, thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. The last exhibition of Mr. Ramachandran, which I had the privilege of seeing, was the one in which monumental Gandhi was, the sculptor was exhibited. And I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about, your fascination with Gandhi and, what inspired the work.
Well, from my childhood, Gandhi was one of the moral image, which is driven into my mind by my teacher in the school, who was a great Gandhian. So he used to talk about Gandhiji practically every day in the class, and I was so fascinated by his classes. I almost became a great admirer of his philosophy of Gandhiji without knowing anything, because he was my teacher and I was only 11, 12-year-old boy. But the way he talked about Gandhiji in those days in the class impressed me very much. Even though my family, there wasn't much of political consciousness of that level. So I got this idea of Gandhiji in those days. This is before independence I'm talking. So when Gandhiji died, I was so heartbroken. I remember that I cut a Gandhiji's picture from a Hindu supplement and put it in a frame and kept it in the puja room along with gods and goddesses. So that is the kind of initiation I had for Gandhiji. But then Gandhiji is one of the iconic image created by Nandalal, which has become, I think, a very important image of Gandhiji as far as Indian art is concerned. Nandalal's Dandi March has opened up a new way of doing portrait, the new way of looking at a person, how to transform that image without being photographically realistic, which you normally see of Gandhiji. So that kind of an image created by Nandalal was in the back of my mind. But then to make Gandhiji, you have to make an image as simple as possible, because he is a kind of a symbol of simplicity in his living, in his dress, in his, everything is that, reduction to something very simple. So when I thought of doing a Gandhiji myself, much later, my childhood experience, recollection of a potter woman who used to come to our house to sell earthen pots. And my mother, being very interested in me becoming an artist or, whatever it is, she thought that I have talents. So she told this woman, please bring some clay for my son to make some images like that. So she came with the clay next day and she did a demonstration for me. So she took a lump of clay and rolled it between her palm and then made it into pillar-like shape. Then she, with a little force, she made it stand. When you press it, then the base expanded, then it became a standing, pillar-like image. Then she put her two thumbs at the top of the thing and pressed it. So Gandhiji, like head appeared. I recollected later. When you press it, his big ears came out from both sides. And then she pressed in the neck. So the body became separate and the head became separate. Then she again pressed below so that the two hands appeared. As if, he is saying namaste. This image which she made at that time was in my mind when I did this, this Gandhiji, his image, recent, a few years ago. So it's the image which is extremely simple. It's like a column with of course, more realistic representation of Gandhiji, but as if it is embedded in a highly polished surface of the cloth covering it. So I call it monumental Gandhi, but the very shape gave it a feeling that you can enlarge it, enlarge to any dimensions.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Ramachandran?
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
I'm Jyoti Prakash Pradhan from Odisha, but still I'm studying in Kala University. I'm doing my master's, College of Fine Arts, Trivandrum. So it was very pleasure to hear to Ramachandran. So I have a question. Like, I don't know whether is it a valid question to him. Being a student, so I have to ask, so how do you look at the present scenario practice? Because you told Ramachandran told like when they were working, they're influencing the surrounding, simple living style. So being a student, I'm always seeing the artwork. Now the present practice is something different. People are institution and artists are doing in different way. New media, they're adapting new media. If you're going to the institution, students are getting adapting the new media, new way to develop in different way. So how do you look at the new present scenario at practice? Just tell about this.
Frankly, I don't look at them. But so you see, I think, because you are a student, you have this problem. But when you start practicing as an artist, you will find your own way.
Yeah. Also, in a sense, well, I mean, every generation, when they enter the art world, they probably have to deal with things that come in their way. So if you look at the mediums that Ramachandran is using, a few hundred years ago, those mediums were not there. Then artists worked with entirely different mediums. So maybe at some point, I mean, what is old today was new. So then at that point, artists had to young artists like you, had to make a decision and decide how they will tackle these new things. So I don't think that is a very new thing. It will be new to each one of us when we encounter it. But this is part of a larger story. So it doesn't matter if the medium is new, if you find a way of addressing things that you think are relevant through these new mediums, then I'm sure you will find your way, which Ramachandran was addressing. What he was probably suggesting is that, I mean, none of us can find that way for you. You will have to find that way yourself by entering into an encounter, entering into a kind of personal engagement with whatever mediums you find, whatever realities you find around you. Because, I mean, in late 1950s, early 60s, when Ramachandran probably came to Santiniketan or moved from there to Calcutta, he was encountering things which he hadn't thought about maybe 5 years before, 6 years before. And so those realities made an imprint on him, and that made an imprint on his work. Was it all pre-planned? Was it all, consciously decided? No, but perhaps this encounter leads you to find ways. I mean, all these ways will appear little by little. It will never appear probably as a whole path. Okay, it's like if you're walking into a landscape, the whole landscape, I mean, a couple of miles ahead of you, you never see. You see what is immediately before you. The way you respond to it, you enter it, and decisions you make there leads you forward, and you happen to then maybe look back, and then you say you have traveled quite a distance. I suppose that's what happens with everybody. And so one doesn't have to be overtly perplexed. One doesn't have to be overtly, excited. These are things that happen. So one look at this, and maybe you make the decisions which you think are proper to you, and probably you'll find an interesting way ahead.
Thank you, sir.
So with that, I would like to thank Mr. Ramachandran and Mr. Siva Kumar. Thank you very much for a very engaging conversation. And I don't know if it is obvious enough, but it surely is about your deeply humane kind of core issues and values that come across through your works, and the fact that within your own being, the way the music, the literature, the arts, the idea of research, all of them, how they collate and how they come together, and with a kind of an incredible disarming lightness that you have, with your jocularness, your humor, and your satire, but also deeply engaging issues that are meaningful. Thank you very much for this, and thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, and hope you all can join in whenever you can on every second Saturday at 6 p.m. for our Meet the Artist lectures. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.